Hey guys, welcome to Screen Fever. My name's Adam Barnard, and I'm joined by my friend Robert Yaniz Jr. today to have a very grand discussion about the state of fandom. This is something that I think needs to be talked about in a sense that, like politics or like anything else in the world, because of the interconnectivity, everything has just become heightened. Like every few weeks, just in our community of the film community, there's some crazy thing happening. And I think the James Gunn story, which has been developing over the past few weeks, has really encouraged me to take the leap to do this discussion and not only, hear my thoughts, but also hear Robert Yaniz Jr.'s thoughts, who's been a professional or entertainment journalist, either part-time or full-time, for many, many years. So this is a guy who's seen the industry change and seen the fan culture change, and I'm so excited to have you on and get to hear your analysis of kind of where things are at within the greater fan community.
Yeah, Adam, thanks for having me back. I think this is a big topic, and one that I think, whether we realize it or not, we're pretty much constantly talking about from one angle or another. So I'm looking forward to getting into it with you.
Absolutely. So let's start with this James Gunn situation. As of recording this podcast right now, we are in the thick of the situation. If you're listening to it in a couple weeks, you'll probably know the answer, and I really wish you could telegraph it back to me right now, but we're going to have to wait with bated breath to see how the situation resolves itself. But I think when it happened, and it was a surprise to me, when I saw the news on Twitter, I thought it was a joke. I thought it was from a parody account. I thought it was such a far-fetched thing to happen, especially to someone who was so revered as James Gunn. And it turned out to be true. And I was at the point where I couldn't believe that something like this would happen.
Well, I actually saw Gunn's apology tweets before I even really heard the news. So I was just like, oh, wait, what's he talking about? Did he say something that offended people on Twitter? What's going on? And then soon after I found out, oh, he's been fired from Guardians of the Galaxy 3. I was like, wait, what? How could that even happen? It's I don't want to we don't want to get too deep into like, did they make the right call or didn't they make the right call? I mean, I personally don't think they made the right call for a multitude of reasons, but I think it's really telling. And it's been very kind of poignant in the last couple of weeks, just seeing the Guardians of the Galaxy cast. They had a signed statement from all of them supporting James Gunn in this. And, I think Dave Bautista has actually gone the furthest in saying that he's like, wants to quit the project. And there's reports coming in that Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios is kind of going to bat to try and get him the gig back. And I think that says a lot to, these are people that work closely with him over the course of several years. And I think that's a big testament to, the kind of person he is and the kind of artist he is, that, the person that ultimately made this call was an exec sitting at the top of Disney headquarters who had no, really no interaction or, not much hands-on experience working with Gunn, but reacted, just in the moment to the controversy that seemed like it was really kind of stirred up out of nowhere. And these are things that were, that he apologized for before even Guardians 1. And these are, they reference, of course, controversial material and stuff like that he's since kind of proven that he's moving past. Like he's been basically everything he's put out on Twitter and interviews and stuff has been, he's done a lot of political statements, which obviously plays into this. But
and that was foolish. That was its own issue, in a sense. Even if, whether I agree or disagree with him, he was unintentionally stoking a fire, which is kind of what ended him, quite frankly.
Right. Yeah. But he hasn't demonstrated that he's this kind. Like the offensive tweets are from 2012, I think, or some of the most recent.
Mostly.
Yeah. So it's been interesting to see this develop, and everybody's comparing it to other controversies and such right now. But I'm very curious to see where this is going to end up one way or another. And as you said, it's very much kind of in flux at the moment.
Well, to be thoroughly clear, I think both of us, both you and I, are on the same page that the tweets are in no way excusable in and of their own right, and are very disgusting and distasteful in general. There's nothing about them that's reputable, you know what I'm saying? There's nothing about them that I can respect, even from a sense of humor, from an angle of comedy. The fact of the matter is, though, a few people on Twitter with an agenda recirculated old tweets which had already been apologized for publicly in The Hollywood Reporter after Gunn was originally hired for Guardians, but before he shot it. there was any time for Disney to really dig their heels in and say, we hired the wrong guy, this guy's a sick pervert, they should have done it back in 2012 when, it popped up in the Hollywood Reporter, and there is no humanly possible way that someone from Disney Legal or Disney PR did not pick up on those tweets or read it in the trades. Again, this was after James Gunn was hired, but before he shot the first Guardians, and it's worth noting that he was in fact hired because of his gritty comedic edge. They were going to do something that was a little more irreverent and a little less kid-friendly than maybe the Avengers were, and something where edgy people find redemption in family and their humanity. There's an article out there that talks about the irony of kind of his firing amidst the message of Guardians and how paradoxical it is. I really just want to take away or dig into the fact that if this was 2012 and it was raised in 2012, he wouldn't have gotten fired. There is something about where we are as a culture in terms of who we offend and how we present ourselves, and that is just so heightened. I mean, one person can get on Twitter and wreck an actor's career if they want. I mean, I wish I was kidding.
Yeah.
It's happened before with many of the actors. This whole Me Too era has been a godsend for women working in the industry, and the fact that people are held accountable. In some other cases, big publications like New York Times or LA Times have jumped the gun and reported on very sketchy and unvetted tweets that ended up sometimes being baseless, like with Aziz Ansari. And then they have to realize they just wrote this huge feature about an unverified tweet that there's a perfectly good explanation on the other side of the story. And you're at the point where you're looking at like a Twitter mob. I mean, in terms of sexual harassment and sexual harassers, women need to be able to speak and to feel safe, but we also can't believe everything we read on Twitter. And the fact that Disney couldn't even discern the political motives and who was circulating it, and the immense weight that would come with firing Gunn without communicating with all branches. Do you see what I'm saying, Robert? It's scary. Yeah, it's like in so many facets, people are very spontaneous, and there's a lot of inequity going on right now too. I mean, as you were saying, like, I mean, scandal has always been a hot thing for journalism, but like right now, it doesn't really take that much to make a scandal happen. And you look at the James Gunn situation and the way Disney handled that. And if those came up and there was concern, which was, by the way, it seems like it was mostly a manufactured concern, because we said, this has been talked about. If you've been paying attention, people knew about this already. So if Disney had brought to their attention and then started like an investigation or something, put things on hold, maybe, then that's different. But you look, not to bring this up to get too deep into this, but then you look at the whole Chris Hardwick thing, which were much more serious allegations. He's like suspended from things, and now all of a sudden he's back and everything's back to normal. And I'm like, well, and yet James Gunn is fired for nothing, really. I mean, things he said that were a long time ago that he's moved past, that he's proven that he's not that same person anymore. And yet that you make a quick reaction, but other people seem like they're getting by without really having their. I mean, granted, I don't know the definitions. I don't know the details in any of these cases. Obviously, none of us do, but without really, Gunn kind of getting punished without sort of due process, and yet other people who are much more. It doesn't add up to me. Yeah, and the funny thing for me is that Disney caused itself a Category 5 shitstorm in an otherwise infallible franchise. I mean, it blows my mind how well Marvel is still doing, and Gunn was the anchor and incredibly seminal in crafting Phase 4, which his Guardians of the Galaxy 3 was going to kick off. So you have really the kind of lead director and creative producer of a slate of the most successful franchise that Disney owns, really, with Marvel, one of the biggest successful blockbuster franchises around. And literally, overnight, you fire him on one person's decision without consulting all involved parties because of a few tweets that were being used as a weapon. I think that's absolutely, from a studio perspective, so reckless, and I can't imagine the kind of corporate ire that would draw, because there's so much malice towards Disney and calling out their hypocrisy and their reckless decision making, and that did not exist 2 weeks ago. It did not have to happen. Gunn should be held accountable. He should need to apologize. He should need to prove that he has changed, but he was not given this chance in this situation to at all save his job, and no due process was held.
Exactly. And it establishes sort of a slippery slope. It's like, well, does that mean everyone is now accountable for things that they said 10 years ago? And then you've seen reports of a bunch of other filmakers in the wake of this whole James Gunn thing deleting thousands of tweets from their accounts. They're like, exactly. Because they're like, just to be safe, I don't want to lose my next job. Let me just get rid of these. Just, clean house a little bit. And it's, it's a big difference. If he had tweeted that now, then I'd be like, well, yeah, that's a PR thing in the middle of the Guardians, and it's a Disney brand. I get it.
Oh, yeah. That's when people draw comparisons to Roseanne. Look, we all know Roseanne has a really disgusting past with Twitter, with what she's said, but it's in the past, and she's been given a new chance at the show, and that works ABC, and everyone was expecting her to behave. When she tweeted that tweet, which was awful in its own right, that's something that was made now. That's not something where she can argue I've changed. That's not something where there's any precedent for change or evolution as a professional and decent human being. There is just no way to parallel those two. I really hate it when people say, but Roseanne should be hired back too. If James Gunn tweeted any of those tweets, last week, that would just be incredibly foolish and unacceptable on every level.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So let me ask you, Robert, because you've been so involved in film criticism and film entertainment journalism, I believe you told me when we were doing our pre-production call that your first article was like 2003?
Yeah, I did some movie reviews back for the University of South Florida in the 2003, 2004. And then kind of since then been writing sporadically for, a lot of different sites. And it's interesting because, when I had my first movie review published, I was really just excited to see my name in print.
Yeah.
And that was when print was still kind of still hanging in there. And, nowadays this was before social media, really. I guess MySpace was sort of in there at that point, but I don't even know if I was on there, honestly, at that point. And it's weird because, we were talking about this earlier, but it's the film community is really just indicative of what's happened in our culture and what's happened and I don't know whether the massive shifts back and forth in politics is affecting that, or what it is just going on with that right now. I think technology really kind of perpetuates it, in that people can tweet something horrific and then sort of hide behind it, or I guess not hide behind it in James Gunn's case. I think that's really changed the way that people express themselves without really taking other people into consideration and that kind of thing. And, there really has been this massive attack on different filmmakers, whether it's Rian Johnson or, we mentioned earlier, Colin Trevorrow, or James Gunn. I think it's interesting. It's definitely heightened is the word, but also more like everybody's been driven to extremes. It's you're either for something, you think it's the best thing ever, or it's ruined this franchise, it's raped your childhood, or whatever people like to say. And I feel like that really came into vogue first with the prequels, and then with Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, like those films, both George Lucas related, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good
I think
point.
those kind of kicked off this whole you're ruining this thing, and like the polarization.
Yeah. Basically, what it seems like is that it's you touched my childhood, and how dare you alter a perfect memory. And, we're not beating up on filmmakers like Noah Baumbach or like, these mid-level indie, occasional studio movie directors. It's only the Marvel, Star Wars, DC franchise filmmakers. Either we objectify them and we deify them and they become like Taika Waititi, who's just so affable, and we can find nothing wrong with him, and formerly James Gunn, who we deified, or it's we villainize them like Rian Johnson or Colin Trevorrow, and we're hinging our opinion on how they handled one movie, more or less. And that blows my mind. And for everyone who says, oh, all the Marvel stuff is bullshit, like, I don't like studio movies, I like art, it's like you complain an awful goddamn lot about studio movies and directors and franchise directors for someone who ostensibly, quote, doesn't care about this, you know?
And to jump off of that, actually, we didn't even mention this, the whole Oscar nomination for the announcement of the most popular film,
Yeah,
which
here we go.
really, which now it's most popular film, I guess, is the blockbusters. And then I guess the best picture is now the art film. Because now, I mean, the Academy is really leaning into that as, okay, well, you have two camps. Here's two categories for it. I like, why you, instead of trying to bring it together, you're only making it worse.
Well, here's the funny thing. Vin Diesel in 2015, when Fast 7 was coming out, he said, Fast 7 is going to win Best Picture, and if it doesn't, the Oscars just won't be relevant anymore. He's like, the Oscars need to adapt to include Fast 7. At the time, I scoffed and thought that was a hilarious notion that the Oscars should need to evolve to the whims of someone like Vin Diesel or Fast and Furious. Lo and behold, 3 years later, I get to eat my words and find out that the Oscars are in fact trying to segue hyper popular, $1 billion plus grossing movies into the awards season. I must admit I'm split. On one hand, I think no matter how good franchise movies get, they just don't get nominated. So there are some movies that display excellence in their own subcategory that will never make it to the Best Picture nomination. This is a chance for them to get recognized. On the other hand, it erodes some of the prestige that we know the Oscars for. It's like we actually use the Oscars to highlight lesser known filmmakers whose brilliant movies maybe didn't get on the cover of USA Today for a whole week and have all these big giant press circuits. So I'm torn. Again, like I'm always the weird kid who doesn't really have an opinion either way. In a world that's hyper polarized, I somehow mostly fall in the middle. I just think it's just a weird evolution of the Oscars all around. It's just strange.
Well, and what's frustrating about that, and I this wasn't even on our notes, this side of the conversation, but what's frustrating about that is that there had been signs that the Academy was starting to evolve a little bit. Like they opened up their membership to much more diverse voices. We had, Heath Ledger won for playing the Joker. We had Mad Max Fury Road, which during the ceremony, a lot of people were like, "Oh shit, is this going to win Best Picture?" Because it was nabbing up a lot of the technical categories, editing, and things like that. And I mean, Logan had a screenplay nomination last year. I mean, there were signs that it was starting to open up. And now this is like completely undoing that. The beauty of the Oscars to me has always been sort of, okay, we can put, Black Panther in the same category as, I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example of what the Oscar baity movies are going to be this year.
Lion, I'm thinking of last year. I'm thinking of the really obscure ones. Not like Shape of Water was huge. Something like Lion wasn't.
Right.
So it's. And there are oftentimes very good films, like even The Imitation Game, I feel like kind of snuck under people's radars, and as opposed to something like The Revenant, where it was like a cultural landmark. It was almost like a blockbuster event in of its own right, even though it was an original historical story,
Exactly. Yeah. And it's interesting with, with the changing voices of film critics and sort of the shaping of fan culture and that whole thing on social media. It's I think a big part of it is that millennials just, these tools weren't out there. Twitter, Facebook wasn't out there before. So it makes me wonder if people like these people online were always this mad and just didn't have a way to express it, or if it's the availability of this technology that has sort of led to them being that way. The overabundance of information, the fact that, everything is everywhere now. Like if you really hate Star Wars, good luck avoiding it online for the months before and after every film is released. You know what I mean? So it's sort of a chicken and the egg scenario. It's like where people are always just pissed off or extreme about their opinions, or has kind of the way that we communicate and the kind of paradox of being more connected than ever yet still constantly disconnected, has that sort of fed into behavioral changes and stuff. And that's a larger discussion, but I mean, the one that's, I think,
this is exactly the place to discuss it. Like the reason we wanted to call it a state of the fandom discussion was to give us the leeway to kind of jump between some pretty ambitious points, and kind of have that freedom to go for it. I think part of the problem, to your point, is that there is positive reinforcement of toxic thought. Um, if if you're at the corner of a playground and you're shouting insults at someone you don't like, but you're alone, you're not gonna keep nagging them to start a fight. If you have a gang behind you, if you have 10 kids in your corner who are all cheering you on as you slander someone and try to incite a fight on the other side of the playground, you're going to want to keep doing it. You see what I'm saying? It's like for people who get on there and say, The Last Jedi sucks, it's a piece of crap, here's why, Rian Johnson is Satan, and then 10 people like that and respond back, now all of a sudden it validates that kind of anger, and it's like, oh my god, my anger has capital on the film discourse market. It's like
Exactly.
I have, I'm part of this now, and there's kind of like a titillation and arrogance that comes with immerging yourself in an echo chamber. And for a positive thing, for positive discussion, that's really good because you're encouraging people to have a discussion. The problem is there are these accounts that just thrive off of the anger, and they surround themselves with other people that thrive off of that anger, and it just encourages them to kind of keep in this negative stew, if that makes sense. That's just a theory. I don't know if it's real.
It's a false, sort of, to me, false sense of belonging. It's like, rather than bond over things that you love, it's just like, that thing sucks, yeah it does, hashtag remake The Last Jedi, or whatever the case may be, rather than dismissing things that you don't like and just moving on. Like, bonds that are built off of negativity, I don't think that's healthy. And whether these people, and that's what I keep going back to, like, I wonder if these people, the people that are being toxic, the toxic fans, I guess, online, if that reflects who they are, or this is just an outlet for them to be like, I'm so pissed about this, I'm going to get it out on Twitter.
I'll humble myself and present an embarrassing story that kind of shows that I think all of us have a bit of this in us. I have a close friendship with someone because we met in the fan community of a certain musical artist we like. And lately we had gotten both very critical of said musical artist. And I'm a big believer of, if you want to be toxic, keep it private. The minute you put it on Twitter, it's like you're donating your toxicity to the world. Whereas if you're just ranting in between a text conversation or a phone call, it's like, it doesn't hurt anyone. It stays in the family, so to speak. Right. It got to the point where we were so frustrated, we were feeding off each other's frustration, and just whatever we would text each other would be about how stupid, how angry we were about this situation, this musical, this artist situation. And it got to the point where I would post on other forums. I would just, the minute I saw something I didn't like, I would just plot myself into this situation like a troll and vent publicly. And I had let that venting that had been pent up and kind of fostered in a conversation that was rooted in anger. And then I kind of, like, the minute I went to a Reddit thread, it's like I just dumped everything that I was feeling right there. And I had to take a step back and said, holy crap, how did I get here? Like, I'm the guy, I would hate myself if I saw that message and I didn't know I had written it, So I think we're all able, with the right encouragement or the right context, to kind of embrace the inner anger about things we care about. And yes, it is rooted in purity, because usually it's about franchises that we care about or properties that we care about, but it doesn't excuse the kind of publicly exhibited malice that a lot of fans are cultivating, including myself sometimes.
Right. And and that's, being critical of a film or whatever, that's fine. But it's also on social media, specifically Twitter, people just get so, I don't know, they just get so into attacking people, not art, and even film critics do this, where you're disparaging a certain filmmaker or a writer or whatever because you don't like the film, and tagging them on your tweets. Or, like, we mentioned pre-call, we mentioned about how, like, Rian Johnson has become like the master of sort of deflecting a lot of that negativity and kind of playing it off, at least publicly. And I think, ultimately, I love Star Wars. I love Star Wars, but I wasn't the hugest fan of Solo. You don't see me bitching about it constantly, about like, oh, this was a missed opportunity. Blah, blah, blah. It's like, it's fine. It's a movie. I liked it all right. But I'm like, I was ultimately mildly disappointed by it, but I'm not trying to convince everybody that my opinion is the right one. It's like, that's the beauty of cinema or any form of art, is its subjectivity. And I think that people that make a certain franchise or whatever so much of their focus online or otherwise, I think they lose that perspective that ultimately, these are movies. This is entertainment. You're meant to watch this and then go back to your life, not to obsess over what you don't like about things, And
Yeah,
it
I know,
and it's
totally.
and like you said, it's easy to get lost in that echo chamber of following a hashtag and, recruiting other people to your point of view.
I think everyone's secretly trying to build their own brand, on Twitter.
Yeah,
Like
that
we're,
makes
we're
sense.
not, social media used to be like a repository for occasional thought. Now it's like everyone or most everyone views their Instagram or Twitter or Facebook as a brand. And that's kind of where within film communities, even all these users are trying to cultivate, find people like themselves out there. They're trying to find their tribe. And then once they find it, they engage in some kind of tribalism, which is what we're seeing. And it's just like, it boils down to a very essential, natural urge, which is to be validated and to be heard and to have an identity and have a community, and,
Yeah.
and if we can find it by people who say fuck the Last Jedi, if that makes us happy, that we're going to go run over to their corner of the room and hang out with them, and that's what the identity becomes. And I don't think, to be clear, I don't think these are bad people. I just think like humanity as a race does not know how to handle the insane and, intense liberty and interconnectivity of social media. We just have
Hmm.
not figured it out yet. I mean, fuck, even our president hasn't figured it out yet. Like
Hmm.
it's from top to bottom. It's a real problem.
And I mean, I think when you're dealing with art specifically, I think it's a delicate balance because these people, whether they're film critics or they're fans, or, as you sort of alluded to, a lot of fans and critics are trying to establish their own brand, whether they have a podcast or they have a YouTube channel or they have, or whatever the case may be. Like everyone is trying to make their voice heard on multiple different formats. And I think it's a balance between stoking your passion for film, for cinema or whatever, and overstepping it. I mean, people that love Star Wars and then have a podcast about Star Wars, that's fine. But even if they hate things, that's fine to talk about it on there. But driving Kelly Marie Tran off of Instagram, or I just saw something earlier about Ruby Rose, who just got cast as Batwoman on the CW. Like that's something about her getting pushed off social media because people are constantly harassing, usually women or people of color of this kind of thing, and that's just not acceptable behavior. I don't care how much you love Star Wars. It's just be a decent human being.
Well, that happened with when Gal Gadot was cast as Wonder Woman many years ago. Like,
Hmm.
one of the main critiques was her breasts aren't big enough.
Yep, I remember
Like,
that.
her tits aren't as big as they are in the comics. Even if you think that, even if you're like, oh, yeah, I'm used to Wonder Woman being Amazonian with, like, you're used to her looking like Ronda Rousey, not Gal
Right.
Gadot. That's fine. That's fine to say, oh, it's to notice it's different. The minute you start to kind of, like, lash out on an actress because her breasts aren't big enough for a part that she was cast in that you like, I
Hmm.
mean, that's a low point. Like that's just a real,
Absolutely.
and to, again, to exhibit it in public. It's not even just like a private thought or a
Yeah,
dirty
I was gonna
joke you make
say.
to a friend.
I was gonna say that's an inside thought, guys.
Yeah,
If you feel that way,
exactly.
keep it either be open, be like, well, all right, she looks different than what I'm used to. And even though Wonder Woman has been around since what, the 40s, so
Yeah.
she's looked many different ways. So I don't know why you're so hung up on. I mean, I know why you're so hung up on one particular version, but still, it's like
Yeah.
you don't need to either be open to change or just keep your negative thoughts to yourself. And people said the same kind of thing to a lesser extent, for sure, with Alicia Vikander as Lara Croft.
Oh, right,
There was a lot
right.
of that happening as well, and it's a real, yeah, I don't, it brings, the social media is like both a wonderful thing as far as connecting people and also bringing out like the dregs of humanity just to like crap on everyone, whether or not they're terrible people. The behavior is kind of reprehensible a lot of the time.
Right, yeah. I mean, that's so funny. I was gonna go political, and then I remember what happened to James Gunn. I'm like, I don't want Disney to fire me in 10 years, so I'll hold back.
Were you going to say there are good people on both sides?
Yeah, well, what I was gonna talk about was a bit, was how there's such a misunderstanding in the film, or a disconnect between making filmmakers and film fans. I really think that if you brought any of these guys who often live, outside the kind of hubs of filmmaking, outside of New York and LA. It's fair to say that most people don't live in New York or LA. and you just don't understand the culture that's around it. If you brought those people to a studio for a week, or put them on a backlot for a week, or brought them on the set of Wonder Woman for a week, the last thing that's going to be in their head is Gal Gadot's tits. But behind a computer, somehow that's the most juicy enjoyment we can get out of being a fan. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like, I wish people would understand the magnitude of the filmmaking process and kind of have a bit more respect and understanding for it, you know? I feel like there can be, if we recognize how crazy the concept of movies is and how difficult they are to get made and the complexity that goes into them, we wouldn't be so, you know, vicious and spontaneous about what we say.
Yeah, and then we're so overwhelmed. People in social media like that who are so disconnected from things. I think we're so bombarded with opinions or quote facts that it's hard to, I think, in today's day and age, to develop real critical thinking, to develop does that make sense, or do I agree with that, or just liking something because it happens to pop up on your feed, just kind of mindlessly roll in with the sort of the group think of it all. And I think that's very dangerous in any about any topic, but specifically with the entertainment industry. It's really kind of shaped the narrative of so many different films and filmmakers, and as we've seen with the James Gunn thing, to kind of bring it back a little bit, it's kind of sunk careers in some ways, just because of the way that we've used these new the new technology and tools that we have today, as opposed to when I started. Again, to bring it back to that. So there's no really easy solution for it. I guess just keep pointing it out and keep discussing it and keep trying to strive for something better. I don't know.
I think, and again, like so many of these things that I mentioned, I'm at some point have been guilty of. So it's not a higher than thou thing. It's more of like a discussion to say, where do the problems lie? Like even amongst ourselves or our friends, like where are we messing up? And let's take a step back. When we look at bullying Kelly Marie Tran off Twitter, or getting James Gunn fired, or all these other things, it's like, wow, like this is having real impact on real world people, and our behavior. Studios listen to our behavior, and that matters. I just think there's such a line between criticizing a project and maybe saying, The Last Jedi is just the worst movie ever. And, you can say the nastiest things about The Last Jedi, but as soon as you try to hurt Rian Johnson or threaten him or harm his life or wish him ill or, hope that he gets fired or lobby for him being fired, it's such like a line of decency. Like you wouldn't work it and picket a law firm of a lawyer you don't like. It's like you wouldn't do that. I mean, just like write a Yelp review and get the fuck over it. Like seriously, I don't understand why there's such an obsession with harming the people. Like, or maybe not physically harming in terms of violence, but harming the livelihood of a filmmaker, of a property that you don't like, which you say doesn't really matter that much anyways.
And a lot of those people do write reviews. If you go to IMDb, you'll see some of these really controversial projects have very low ratings because everybody's just kind of trashing things on there, which is why now you can't trust IMDb user ratings at all. I know. It's become a real mess. And in part of that, I mean, on the film criticism side of things, part of that is also, the lack of diversity as far as on the film side of things. Like you get so many straight white men and their perspectives on films, and not so much of people of color or women or whatever. I think that we just have one united voice on the film criticism side of things, and it's not really helping matters much, I guess, is my point with that. Because the fans and the critics are very much very, very divided in their opinions a lot of time, but also kind of interconnected in the way they're feeding off of each other as far as the negativity is concerned.
Yeah, and to that point, it's really interesting how presumptuous some of the white guys quite literally are as to what's good for the minorities. Like the whole idea behind this new era is that we're striving for more equality in the workplace, equal pay, more diversity in the workplace, and that should mean that minorities are weighing in and saying, here's what's good for me, or here's what's isn't. Here's where I'm being cheated, here's where I'm not. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a way to have your voice heard and to showcase kind of like, say, the culture of the LGBTQIA plus community that I just don't know. You know what I'm saying? It's like I
Hmm.
can
Yeah.
pretend to know, I can ask my white friends what they think, but until I actually hear from the heart of the community, I don't know. The problem is I've seen so many critics who are part of that old school white boy community explaining and kind of like mansplaining, so to speak, without even realizing it, that this film is bad for your community, or this film is the gay film we've always needed. And it's like, oh my God, you're missing the point. The point is you have to humble yourself and say, I don't know. Let me hear from you. This is interesting because this film discusses that topic, but instead we still think we know the answers, even though we're bragging about how progressive we are. It's
Right.
just, it's so, and I have to catch myself. I'm like, yeah, I can say what I think about what Lady Bird means to teenage girls, but have I actually asked, 5 teenage girls how accurate the movie is, or what that movie is like, or what it means for them? And sadly, the answer is no.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's, I mean, I mentioned this pre-call, but like, films like even Ant-Man and the Wasp, which is seemingly an innocuous, Marvel adventure, very lighthearted and all that. And there's a film critic that I follow on Twitter named Kristen Lopez, who is disabled, one of the only disabled film critics I see on Twitter, by the way, or in general. I don't know how many there are, but their voices definitely aren't being heard. And she came at the whole. I don't know if you've seen Ant-Man and the Wasp at this point yet or not, but
I'm
the
familiar enough with the plot.
the
You could
the
talk about
the
it.
yeah the villain in that Ghost, and like she has sort of dealing with chronic pain and that kind of thing, and the way that the film resolves her storyline. Kristen was pointing out sort of how that relates to her as being a disabled person, and kind of dealing with pain on a regular as part of your life. And she, whether I agree with her assessment or not, it made me look at a film in a way that I hadn't thought of before. And I see, as someone who works in that film criticism industry, and someone who's grown up a straight white man, it's like I need those voices. They help me expand my perspective on things and think outside of myself. And I think a lot of what we're seeing with fans and critics is kind of uh, illustrates the fact that people need to step away from their own life and be like, oh, what is this saying about about gay people, about trans people, about black people, about women, and how is this film that I'm reviewing, that I'm writing about, or that I'm just writing a tweet about, how is it reflecting those communities? And what is it saying about it? And I think you know it's funny that we're having this conversation, because I did my wife and I talked about toxic fandom on the Crooked Table podcast like
Oh,
a couple
okay.
months ago, sort of delving off of like Ocean's 8 and the Kelly Marie Tran thing that happened around there. And I think really the solution is for people, at least people like like me. What I've done is I've sought out those voices. If I see, if I see different critics of different backgrounds, minorities, people of color, et cetera, whatever, I follow them on Twitter or I listen to their podcasts, and I try and absorb other points of view and be like, huh, I didn't think of that about, Sorry to Bother You, that was making this point, or that was illustrating this thing. And that's how it's like to be a black man in America, because I'm not a black man. So I've never had that experience. And it makes you appreciate the art on another level, and kind of what the filmmaker is going for and how it connects to a different audience. And I think there's a lot of people that are just like, nope, I read this thing, I see things my way. I don't want to hear anything to the contrary. And I think that's a very dangerous thing to do in film criticism, fandom, or just life in general. I think you need to be open to other people's and we've even talked about like listening to other opinions and kind of soaking up other people's thoughts, and looking at them critically, whether you share them or not. It's you considering something that you never thought of before. And I think that's really important. And I think it's interesting with amidst all of this sort of political and cultural insanity that we're kind of in the middle of. I think we have a lot of, I think in a way there's sort of a creative renaissance happening with films like
Yeah.
Get Out and Lady Bird and Sorry to Bother You. And I'm hearing great things about Black Klansman. I haven't gotten a chance to see that yet, but there's like
Yeah.
a lot of filmmakers and storytellers are really jumping on that and presenting sort of an alternative to the mainstream Marvel, Mission Impossible and all like the big tent poles. They're bringing in they're bringing a perspective to it that we haven't really seen, at least to this extent. Like, it's really going, like, films like that are sort of getting a groundswell of support because they are so needed right now. And a lot of times that's taken the form of satire, which I think is very telling about how um, how it's hard, it's hard to get those messages across in a straight dramatic film. But if you sneak them in
Yeah.
there around using humor, I think that it's a lot more palatable for especially white people to sort of digest. And I think Get Out is a great example of that.
Yeah, there's like truth and pain.
Exactly.
It's like there's like comedy in the pain, and like the best way to represent that is, instead of making something that's self-serious or pretentious, kind of pointing out the lunacy of modern day race relations in some sense.
Exactly.
Um, I really am, I guess, like, despite the exhaustion, I am very optimistic to see where we land in this. I mean, if for all that we've complained, you got to think we've had a massive surge of more diverse filmmakers actually get their works out there and have them be very successful. We've uprooted predators, both in front of and behind the camera, who have been chronic predators and kind of setting a cultural trend within an industry. People like Spacey or Weinstein. And we are kind of progressing in terms of the medium, in terms of how much we can accomplish, with TV and film, and there's more avenues for stories, and it's kind of like the most exciting time to be a filmmaker. I think we experienced a growth spurt that ended up being painful. It kind of was,
Yeah.
it stretched us a little too far, and like I'm saying, with the amount on Twitter, with the Me Too movement getting a little out of control, and with fan, discourse getting a little out of control. But like all evolutionary things, we adjust. And my hope is that in 5 years, we look back and say, God damn, that was really tough. That was really embarrassing and frustrating and toxic at times. But like, we learned so many lessons, as a culture and as a film community, because I care about the film community. There can be so much purity in that. It's like we show up because these movies have touched our lives, because they matter something, because the people we meet become friends, become kind of like kindred spirits. We just don't need all the hate that comes with it right now.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this evolves, and I am overall optimistic that we're going to come out of this as the film community in general, and hopefully have learned some lessons. And it does, I am liking, like I said, the creative renaissance that I'm seeing from some sort of burgeoning filmmakers, especially like, Jordan Peele and Boots Riley for Sorry to Bother You, or like Greta Gerwig for Lady Bird, and
just
just
Reeves with Mudbound as well, which is like on Netflix. Yeah.
I mean, Patty Jenkins, we just got the highest grossing female directed film of all time last year. So, I mean, I think that kind of thing says a lot about the audience that is there for these, for women and people of color, and for those new voices to be heard. And we're seeing a lot of accountability both in front of the camera and behind it, as you alluded to. And I think they're all positive things amidst kind of a shitstorm of
yeah, no, totally.
It's just like, just have to wade through, I guess.
Absolutely. So maybe in a year or two, we'll have another discussion. We'll have
go.
you back, and we'll say, what's changed, what's improved. Because the truth of the matter is, I'm not going to go anywhere. Like, I like movies too much to kind of rage quit, film communities or whatever, or to rage quit film fandom. It's just, as much as I might rant about it, it's not going to happen. So, like, it's kind of like being in a dysfunctional family and saying, when all the brothers are fighting, it's like, God, we got to figure it out, because like, we're not going to just stop being family, It's
we're in this for life.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks again for joining me to discuss this, man. For anyone who's listening out there, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear what maybe I said that was wrong or right, or again, listening to other perspectives, because like, the more civilized we become and the more we'll actually listen and kind of not impulsively shoot our thoughts out into the public, I think we're going to get somewhere. So maybe this video and this feedback can be an exercise in that, to hear, what other people feel is the state of fandom, and where we have to go as a community.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm interested to see how people react to this one.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for listening. As always, there's plenty of other content on the channel that comes to film analysis or reviews, and even some video essays. And Jackson and I have been putting our short films that we've done over the last few years on the YouTube channel. So go ahead and check out our Screen Fever channel, and like and subscribe if you enjoy what you see. And until then, we'll see you next time.